Hello everyone and welcome to the recorded guest webinar. I'll let Wolfgang do the introductions as per the usual in just a sec, but as normal I'm just going to read out a brief statement about this recorded session. So today's webinar is being recorded. Please could everybody ensure that their video is switched off and that they only use first names when addressing others in order to ensure there's no identification of individuals after the session. We record webinars for three reasons. Firstly, for internal training so we can get better at delivering them. Secondly, to provide to funders as part of our commitments to them. And thirdly, so that trainees like yourselves can watch these sessions in the future. And if you're watching this in the future, hello, in order to support their career development where you have been unable to attend the live session. We store these videos on our secure internal Teams platform and as private YouTube videos, which cannot be accessed without our permission, and we will store these videos for a maximum of 5 years. You have the right to choose to leave the session at any stage if you do not wish to be recorded. If you do choose to leave, we will attempt to hold another unrecorded webinar to accommodate you. If you have spoken during the session and wish the recording to be deleted, we will do so. Neither Microsoft Teams nor Springboard store any information about you, including your IP address. And for any further information or for a transcript of what I've just said, please visit the news article Understanding Webinars on your Flow dashboard. Done.
Wow, well done. Okay, take a breath, take a sip of our brew. You deserve it. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our guest webinar Friday afternoon. We have a special guest again today here as usual from Diageo. Welcome to Kirsten Jarin, who is going to be talking about one of my favorite Diageo products today, amongst other things, but she will reveal in a minute what that's going to be. But first of all, Kirsten, you have a very interesting job title, and I'm really intrigued. Beer and Whiskey Ambassador. What a great sounding job title. What does that actually mean?
Well, apart from having probably the longest job title amongst my colleagues, I look after the beer and whiskey part of a reserve team. So I look after the Irish whiskey, American whiskies, as well as Guinness. So I'm in charge of all of that.
Fantastic. That sounds an amazing job. That sounds like a dream job. Would you call it that's a dream job?
I mean, I'm really lucky because it's all the things I love. I mean, I love whiskey and beer, and I have an amazing team. So I would say probably one of the best band jobs I've had so far. So I am extremely lucky.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit, what does a beer and whiskey ambassador do on a day-to-day basis? What does a sort of a typical day, if that even exists, look like? Give us some examples.
So usually before, I guess, all of this hit, we would always go to the office, start the day with emails. That's the same now. We still do emails in the morning, planning our days. Most of our job role is brand activation and brand advocacy. So we talk about our brands, we go to different bars, hosting different events, teaching people not just about Bulleit and Rowan Co and Guinness, but about the category itself. So a lot of my trainings is not just, oh, Bulleit is the best, it's all about the category itself. So I can educate people on the category as a whole so they can know about the category and they can enjoy it in their spare time. So a lot of brand advocacy, usually a lot of events, but recently a lot of online trainings. We've been doing a lot of online content, Instagram lives. So that's been our day so far. A lot of online meetings and social media planning.
Great, fantastic. So on a day-to-day basis, let's say pre-coronavirus, how many clients would you see on a typical day? How many bars, pubs, restaurants, or hotels would you go into in one typical day?
I guess you want to make sure that it's more kind of quality over quantity. So usually during a day, I would probably try to see about 6 to 8 accounts, if that. Just because I want to make sure that every account I go to, they're getting all of my time. I'm not just rushing off trying to cram all the meetings in one go. I could easily see 20 different accounts in a day and just go around London. But for me, that's not a good use of my time. So I make sure every single account gets all the time that I have. They get my full attention and I can support them as best as I can. And I always like to make sure that I can stay, have a cocktail off their menu, try some of their experiments.
Wow. That's part of your job, drinking cocktails.
I have to quality check. So
fantastic! That's how you call it. Brilliant. That sounds really good. So apart from drinking cocktails, what would be your favorite thing about your job? What would you say?
I guess the social aspect. So I am really lucky that within this job, being a brand ambassador, I meet so many different people across the UK and in London, and I can travel anywhere in the UK. I can pick up the phone and say to someone, I'm heading down to, say, Manchester, or I'm heading down to Edinburgh, and I have people say, okay, we'll be ready, like we'll go out for some drinks, we'll, hang out. So that's what I really love, the social aspect, the meeting people. And this industry, it truly is. It's a family. We have each other's backs, and it's just really nice that some of the people that I do work with have become really close friends as well, and we all kind of hang out, and it's really nice because it is a really nice industry to be a part of.
Great, fantastic. So tell us a little bit, how does somebody become a beer and whiskey ambassador? I can imagine that there'll be some guys here or girls listening to the session thinking, I want that job. How does somebody become a beer and whiskey ambassador?
Well, I guess it's probably my background. So my background all comes from beer. So I worked in Brewdog. I helped open a brewery in Australia for 4 years, so I ran that. When I came back here, I was working with different brands, different beer brands, and then I was a cider ambassador for 2 years. And mainly most of it was the networking aspect. It's a lot of networking. It's a lot making a lot of positive connections, as well as working really hard and working from the bottom up, essentially, to become a brand ambassador. It's basically just being nice to every single person you meet, because you never know where anyone lands. And I'm very fortunate that I was really close friends with lots of the Diageo Reserve team. And when this role was coming up, they all kind of recommended me. And it was because of the positive connections I had made with people that I meet. So I guess it's that hard work and making positive connections within the industry.
So networking is certainly very, very important in this industry particularly. So how long have you been doing this role for? And well, what was the sort of most immediate job you did before that?
So I started with Diageo in December. So it's been 6 months now. So we were basically doing lots of things before this all hit. And I essentially am very new in the role. So it was a lot of adjusting to this role during this unique time. But before that, I was looking after a French cider company. So I was the brand ambassador for a cider company called Maison Sassy. And I helped grow their brand for 2 years, essentially doing the same as I'm doing now, brand advocacy and growing the cider category in the UK.
Fantastic. That sounds really good. So you've become an expert on cider as well, then, I take it.
Well, because my interest is, I love brewing. I geek out about brewing and distilling and cider, beer, whiskey. It's all hand in hand, because essentially, obviously, before we'll go into it, but before whiskey is whiskey, it is essentially beer. So it all kind of just all links. And I just like studying about different spirits and just having a good knowledge of all things booze related, really.
Fair enough. So you will know that there all of the guys who are listening in here are job seekers at the moment. They're looking for some kind of opportunity, mostly in hospitality. What kind of top tips could you give these guys in order to get out there, find a job that they really would enjoy, or maybe even also make sure that they keep that job? What sort of would be your top tips?
Well, I guess probably my top tip is make positive connections. So ensure that people that you're befriending in the industry are people that want to lift you up and they want to see you go far. I'm very fortunate that I have a really good circle of friends in the industry when I started, who were just very encouraging and very positive. That's the main key, is finding positive people, and that will open a lot of doors for you, because they will introduce you to a load of different people. Go out to different cocktail bars, start chatting to people, start chatting to the bartender, because you never know, they could be hiring, but maybe they're not actively hiring. The most important thing is just to make those friends and just to really socialize. And like I say to everyone, make positive connections. This industry, it comes full circle. In 3 years' time, you're going to meet someone who is, you never know, could be the HR hiring manager for Bacardi, because you see people, they start from bars and then they go far. So my thing is to always make positive connections, even if the person you're having a conversation with, you don't really agree with their views. It's really important to ensure that you just keep the positive connections and ensure that when anyone thinks of your name, because people, when they say they get into products, they say they get products based on the person. So it's really important to really have a really positive reputation. And when you're in a role, when you've got a bartender position, it's always to remember that we're in hospitality. Our job is to make customers happy. We aren't saving lives. We're just trying to make their day better. Too often do I see bartenders sometimes, and a customer's asking for something, and then there's a little bit of attitude, a little bit of eye rolling going on. You may not think someone's watching, but there are always eyes. You know what? If a customer is being difficult, I know it's hard. Just take a hit. They, at the end of the day, we don't know what they're going through. The best we can do is just be as positive as we can. So that's my thing. If you want to stay in hospitality, remember that the key, we are in a people business. We are here to just serve drinks and make people's days a little bit better. So that's my key, just positivity. And I see a lot of it now. So it's really good to see.
Great, thank you so much for that. That's really appreciated, Kirsten. Thanks for sharing that. So I would say let's go and hand over to you for your presentation. Talk about these wonderful products you brought with you today here. And yeah, we're all excited because, as I said, these are some of our favorite Diageo products that we have here. So I'll hand over to you. We'll allow questions from the guys later. Ted, is there anything in the chat already there? Is there anybody asking any questions just now, or shall we just go on to the presentation?
Not just yet, boss. I think we can crack on with the presentation. If anything comes up, I will let you guys know, / I will keep them for the end.
Great. So I'll take myself off camera and I'll hand over to you for the moment just now, Kirsten. Thank you.
Perfect. I'm just going to share this presentation that I have. Let's just... Okay, so like I said, I am the GB ambassador for Beer Whisky. So the whiskies I do look after are these three, and then we've got Row & Co as well. So before we get into kind of what Bulleit is and who Bulleit is, I'd like to chat a little bit about the category, because American whiskey, it is very interesting. It's a very interesting and complicated spirit. And a lot of people always ask me the question, what is bourbon? Bourbon actually was a household. So back in the 17th century, there was a massive family, and they were very famous. They were known for, they were linked with luxury, basically. And until 1792, this French family was basically ruling France, and they were known as the House of Bourbon. And their name was known, and it was linked with luxury chocolates, with luxury food goods. And during the American Revolution War, King Henry XVI, he actually helped America during the Revolutionary War. So what they did was they gave King Louis a piece of land in Kentucky, and basically they called it Bourbon Country after his family's name. So that's kind of where the whole bourbon term came about. Was from a very old school family. Lots of people will tell you there are different things behind bourbon. There's loads of different stories. But it was this French family that really kind of started with the whole bourbon name. So people say there are 3 ingredients that goes into bourbon making. I like to say there are 4 ingredients, just because I think that wood is the most important ingredient in whiskey making. So typically what you'll get in your bourbon, you'll get your grains, your yeast, your water, and your wood. These are all really important in the bourbon making process and the distillation process, because they all contribute to the final flavor of the liquid. So the grains aren't there for flavor. They're more there for texture and mouthfeel. So when you get that oily texture in your whiskey, you get those kind of waxy notes. That's coming from the grain base. So there are loads of different grains that you can use in bourbon, but the grain base for bourbon, it has to be 51% corn. So all different kind of grains can give you different kind of mouthfeel. There are different types of corn, such as grains such as corn. You can also use rye in bourbon. You can also use wheat. People could also use oats. People use rye. We use a mixture of corn, rye, and barley in our whiskey, and they all contribute to different flavors. So if you're using oats, you get more of a mellow, creamy kind of whiskey, and using more rye will give you more kind of spicy, toffee-like notes in your whiskey. And corn obviously contributes and gives you more of a sweet note. So that's really important to remember. Grains are not there for flavor; they're there for more for mouthfeel. And then you have yeast. So yeast, this little guy here is yeast, and these are all the kind of aromas you can get from yeast. So yeast not only contributes to the final aroma of your bourbon, it also contributes to flavor as well. Yeast is one of my favorite ingredients in whiskey because it's so complicated. But so much can go wrong with the yeast. If a yeast strain gets infected during the distillation process, it can really hamper the end product of a whiskey. So there are lots of positive aromas you can get from yeast. If you're smelling meringue, butterscotch, kind of creme fraiche, hay, chocolatey notes in your whiskey, those are really, really positive notes. And those are the kind of things you should be smelling from your bourbon. If you're getting more cheesy, dill, yogurt, buttery, like off butter notes, that means the yeast strain has probably been infected along the distillation process. And a yeast strain infection can happen from the yeast not being stored in the right temperature. It's not the equipment's not sterile, and that can lead to off flavors. So when you detect off flavors in your whiskey, that's usually coming from the yeast strain. So yeast is very, very important because it's very fickle. It's very hard to get right. A lot of distillers and brewers, when they figure out that yeast strain that works for them, they keep it a very closely guarded secret. Very, very important in both distillation and brewing beer, because yeast is the pinnacle essentially of whiskey and beer. And then you have water. So water is used in all manners of the distillation process, in the mashing, in fermentation, in the cleaning, in the wort. Water is very essential that it is free of bacteria and it's the right pH level. A lot of distillers will tell you that you need to get your water from some sort of Tibetan diamond palace and it has to be filtered 5 times in order for it to be used. That is incorrect, because water, it is so important in the distillation process because you use it in all manners. It doesn't contribute any sort of flavor. It just so happens that in Kentucky and Dublin, where we make our beer, we have really great water and we're very lucky. But as long as water is clean, free of bacteria and the right pH level, and it's hard water, not soft water, and it has the right mineral levels, it's good to use. A lot of distillers will tell you it has to be a specific source. It does not, because it's mostly evaporated anyways. So then you have wood. So I like to consider wood as the 4th ingredient of bourbon making. A lot of people tell me it's not an ingredient. I think it is, because it gives you the flavor and it gives you the aromas and it gives you the color. And all the flavor you get in whiskey is coming from aging in the barrels, especially in bourbon, where the wood casks are charred in the inside. And that's what gives bourbon that really unique toffee aroma and those kind of caramelized sugars that we all know and love in our bourbon. We don't know where the charring of the barrels had started. There's loads of rumors surrounding the inside of wooden barrels and why we charred them. One of my favorite stories about wood is that apparently in the 18th century, they used to store fish guts into wooden barrels, and then they would try to repurpose the wooden barrels. So they started to char the inside to get rid of the smell. That's what I heard. And that's how kind of charring the inside of wooden barrels started.
Wow.
I'm not sure. Pardon?
Did not know that. That's a great story.
I'm not sure if it's true, but that's what I heard. That they used to store fish and they didn't want it to smell fishy, the whiskey, so they would char the insides. It's like, oh, fair enough. No one to this day, as I know, uses their whiskey barrel and puts fish guts in there. Just to clarify, no one does. So yeah, those are the 4 ingredients in bourbon. You've got your grains for your mouthfeel, your yeast for your flavor and aroma, water in all manners of the distillation process, and then you get your wood, which is your flavor vessel for your bourbon. So the longer your bourbon is resting in your casks, the more flavor and the more color you get. And all bourbon needs to get its color from the aging in the wooden barrels. Does anyone have any questions about some of the ingredients that go into bourbon? No. Okay, so we're going to go on to what exactly is bourbon. So bourbon, American whiskey, it's very confusing. It's complex. It's American whiskey is a spider web that even to this day I don't understand. But there are a few rules and regulations in order for a bourbon to be called a bourbon. And these are the strict rules that are in place in order for American whiskey, to be classified as a bourbon. Contrary to popular belief, bourbon does not need to be made in Kentucky. It can be made anywhere in the US to be called bourbon. If you're making straight bourbon, that has to be made in Kentucky. But all bourbon must be made in the US. All of the aging of your bourbon needs to be done in fresh charred oak barrels. So what that means is the barrels have to be first fill no liquid in there prior, and the insides have to be charred. As I mentioned before, it gives you those really unique flavors that you find in your bourbon. And there's a lot of history with the charring of oak barrels, from someone used to store fish guts to someone requested burnt barrels to James C. Crowe, who basically implemented clean distillation process in the 18th century. There are a lot of rules and regulations. All we know is that charring the inside of the oak barrels gives bourbon that kind of sugary, caramelized butterscotch flavors that we all know and love in bourbon. So straight bourbon, like I said, has to be aged for 2 years. So straight bourbon and bourbon are two different things. Straight bourbon needs to be made in Kentucky and aged for 2 years. But as long as bourbon is charred in oak barrels and made in the US, it can be classified as a bourbon. The mash bill, so basically that's the grain base, and the grain base, which makes up the body of the whiskey, has to be at least 51% corn. And all bourbon must be 100% natural. No colorings, no additives, no E numbers can be added to bourbon if it's to be called a bourbon. The one question people will always ask you, but what about Jack Daniels? Is Jack Daniels a bourbon? Is it Tennessee whiskey? Jack Daniels is a different breed. They have their own process. They basically have this thing called the Lincoln Country Press, and it's not a bourbon. It is a Tennessee whiskey. So it's a completely different whiskey. Jack Daniels have a lot of different rules and regulations in Jack Daniels world. So that's the key thing to remember about bourbon. It must be made in the United States. Minimum of 51% corn in the mash bill. All bourbon must be aged in charred oak barrels, and all bourbon must be 100% natural as well. So the bourbon making process, it is really quite simple. Basically, it's very similar to that of making scotch. So you get your grains, you mill your grains down to a fine flour. You basically grind it down, and then you take your grains over to mashing. So what this means is incorporating the water with the grains. And what happens here is that corn is always cooked first. The reason why corn is cooked first is because it's a very difficult grain and it needs to be cooked separately. So corn always gets cooked first and then the secondary grains. What we do at Bulleit, we cook corn first. So we have 68% corn in our bourbon mash bill, 51% rye and 4% malted barley. So we cook the corn first, we mash the corn first, then we mash the rye in afterwards, and then we mash the barley in last. The reason we add barley in last is not because we don't add it for flavor, it's more to aid the fermentation process. And once that's all mashed together, you get this kind of syrupy wort liquid. So basically it's called a wort, and what this liquid is basically what we refer to as a distiller's beer, because basically whiskey is essentially beer. The only difference is whiskey gets distilled and then beer gets brewed. So once the water is all incorporated, we take it to fermentation. And this is where it gets really interesting. So all bourbon distillers will add a sour mash. So what a sour mash is basically spent grain from the last distillation process. We take the spent grain and we add it to the new fermentation process. The reason we do this is because, number one, sour mash or spent mash is basically aids fermentation. It helps lower the pH level of the current mash, and it helps to keep the distillation process nice and clean. And using a sour mash actually adds a lot of flavor to your whiskey. Again, a lot of people think this sour mashing is tied to one particular whiskey company. It is not. Sour mash is used across the board, and we do sour mash over at Bulleit as well. And then once that is fermented, the fermentation process takes around 3 to 4 days, depending on the distillery. Everyone has different timescales. It's taken off to distillation. So we use column stills at Bulleit. Basically, what we want to do in this distillation is we just want the heart. So in the distillation process, the liquid basically has heads, and it has heads, hearts, and tails. What you want to do is you want to get rid of that heads and tails, and you just want to keep the heart. The heads and tails in the distillation process is basically acetate and methanol, and we don't want that. We just want to keep the main part of the whiskey, the good stuff. So Bulleit, we double distill, and this just to keep all the flavors and to really ensure that we get the good part of the whiskey, which is the heart. Once that is distilled, it is taken over to the barrels. So at this stage, this liquid is white, and this liquid that's come off the distillation stills is known as white dog. The reason being because it's still a white liquid, and it will turn brown once it ages in the bourbon casks. So here at Bulleit, our phrase is "it's ready when it's ready." But we do age all our whiskies, bar the 10 years, for 6 years, both the bourbon and the rye. So our whiskey does age for up to 6 years, and that's why there's a lot of depth of flavor in our whiskey. And then once it's aged, we take it over to bottling. With bourbon, you cannot bottle to more than 45% ABV. All bourbon must be 45% ABV, or it cannot be classified as a bourbon. So that's basically the whiskey distillation process. Really simple. The only really unique part of bourbon making is that use of that sour mash, which is only really found in American whiskey making. So we're going to go on to the fun stuff, which is actually chatting about Bulleit bourbon. So Bulleit bourbon is our flagship. So it's the whiskey that everyone knows and loves. Unfortunately, I don't have the bourbon to hand because I'm out of stock, but it's basically similar to this bottle with the orange label, and it's our house whiskey. So that's kind of where everything started. It's very unique because it's got a really high rye content, and we add the malted barley in there as well. So what you'll find in a bourbon, it's a lot of butterscotch, a lot of buttery popcorn flavors, and it's not that sweet. So the reason why people love our bourbon so much is because of the use of rye. Rye is the heart of everything we do at Bulleit. We love rye. We just love that spicy backbone. We just love the flavors that rye gives you, and it really ensures that our bourbon is not sweet. So that's why a lot of people prefer our bourbon in old fashions, just because it's a lot more of a spicy finish rather than a sweet finish. So yeah, a Bulleit bourbon, lots of caramel in there, lots of cinnamon flavors, a little bit of spice from the rye. You get those almost like maple toffee notes as well, a lot of vanilla, because obviously when you char the inside of your oak barrel, you're getting those caramelized sugars, which kind of come off as vanilla notes. So really loved whiskey by everyone, and everyone adores and knows our bourbon very well. And then we have our high rye whiskey. So Bulleit rye is 95% rye and 5% malted barley. And the reason why Bulleit rye came about is because it's a homage to history. So American whiskey was predominantly rye-based before the rise of corn. And our founder, Tom Bulleit, his great-great-grandfather was making a high rye whiskey. And so we created a rye as a homage to him, because rye is what he predominantly used back in the 18th century. So what you'll find in our rye, I personally love. I love the rye. I love the bourbon, but I'm very much a savory, spicy kind of flavors, and I prefer those. So I personally lean towards the rye a lot more. So what you get in this is a lot more allspice flavors. You get a lot of clove coming through as well. You can kind of get notes of black cherry. And because there's more rye in this than corn, it's a little bit more darker and a little bit more amber in color. And I absolutely love the Bulleit rye in old fashions and Manhattans. It's a really good whiskey to offer as an alternative if someone doesn't like sweet bourbon. Rye is a really good one to go for. And then you have our 10-year. So this is our only age statement bourbon. We don't put any age statements on our whiskey. We just say when it's ready, it's ready. But like I said earlier, our bourbon is aged for at least 6 years. So the 10 is the same recipe as the bourbon. It's the exact same recipe. The only difference is it's been aging for 10 years. And as you can see here, the difference is the color. So it's a lot more kind of amber, a lot more kind of deep chocolate notes, and because it's been aging for a longer period of time, you really get those kind of anise flavors. It's a little bit more smoky. You kind of get candied orange peel in there as well, and this is beautiful. with a pint of Guinness. It's one of my favorite things to enjoy on a Friday is a little dram of Bulleit 10 and some Guinness. So those are our three whiskies. I've got some slides which show some of the serves that we prefer with Bulleit. Towards the end, during our Q&A, I'll show you a fun kind of cocktail that you can make with whiskey. But these are the serves that we do lean towards. We do love using a mint julep to showcase our bourbon. And we also do lots of iced teas. So these are really, really simple recipes. Here at Bulleit, we just like everything simple. 3 ingredients, 4 ingredients max, and just cocktails that really showcase our whiskey. Does anyone have any questions before we go on to Irish whiskey? I'm gonna move these guys over here.
We don't have it. We don't have any in the chat just yet. I have to. I'm saving lots of questions up for the end, so I'll hit you with a big lump because I'm listening at the moment. Daniel says, "Can you go back one slide, please?" Dan, we're gonna. Oh, there we go. For the recipe. Okay.
I can send this around as well if anyone would like.
That would be really kind if you're able to.
Yeah.
Dan, one more and one more back, please, as well. I think people are quite interested in the recipes here.
That looks good.
Agreed.
I
do love a mint julep.
I've got fresh mint growing in the garden. I might give that a go, actually.
You can make a mint julep.
Yeah.
If you don't have a tin cup, one thing you can do is if you get an old can from a food can and wash it out very well and make sure it's got no sharp edges. That's what we used to do at home when we would run out of metal cups. Is use a tin can full of ice, just to give it that sort of original metal flavor. But don't use it more than once because tin oxidizes and can create quite an unpleasant flavor. So one and done.
So we're going to go into Roe & Co. So I also look after Irish whiskey. Irish whiskey is quite funny because you talk about America. After I talk about American whiskey, I'm like, here are the rules and regulations of Irish whiskey. It's not as strict as bourbon making. There's no reason for that. Just Irish whiskey. It started off with people just making it in their bathtubs, and then it grew into this amazing category it is today. The main thing about Irish whiskey, it must be distilled and aged for minimum of 3 years in the Republic of Ireland. And it must be made out of a mash of cereal grains, and it has to be aged in Ireland. So compared to American whiskies, we don't have as many rules and regulations. Very similar process to making Scotch. It just so happens Irish whiskey, as long as it's made in Ireland, it can be classified as Irish whiskey. So, Roe & Co is a relatively new whiskey, but it's a whiskey with a lot of history. George Roe was actually one of the founding fathers of Irish whiskey. Back in the 18th century, he had an 18-acre distillery, and he had horses. And this is his old kind of land, which it was huge. He was distilling so much whiskey a year. I think he was distilling up to 2 million gallons of whiskey a year. And he was very affluent, very, very popular. And Irish whiskey was on the rise. So back in the day, you had Powers and you had Jamesons. And they were kind of the founding fathers of Irish whiskey. Unfortunately, a few things had happened to Irish whiskey that basically became kind of the fall of Irish whiskey. The number one main thing that happened to Irish whiskey was the Prohibition. So when Prohibition hit, Irish whiskey took a massive hit. And then also the rise of Scotch. So once Prohibition had ended, Scotch could meet the demand of making whiskey, Irish whiskey could not. So what George Roe basically did, he joined with Jameson's, Powers, and Dublin Liberty Distilleries to form one big company, and they decided that they were just going to brew under one roof, and they were just going to make one whiskey. Obviously, trying to put 4 founding fathers of Irish whiskey under one roof is never going to work. So George Roe decided to shut his distillery, and he sold his land to Guinness, which was quite sad because he actually didn't like Arthur Guinness. So when George Roe was distilling his whiskey, Arthur Guinness was opposite brewing Guinness, but they spent a lot of time insulting each other. So him having to sell his distillery off to Arthur Guinness was probably not the best part of his life. But he left behind this amazing legacy of whiskey. So what Rowan Co is today, it's a reinvention of a spirit that we've basically taken and brought it to the modern era. And what you'll see here is this little tower, and you'll see a little pear tree. The reason why we have such an emphasis on this tower and this pear tree, number one, the tower used to fuel the whole distillery back in the day. And the pear tree has lasted since the 18th century. We don't know how this tree has flowered over this long, where, you know, it's 2020 now and it's still going. It still flowers pears, but don't eat the pears because they are moldy and they don't taste nice and they're old pears. But it's amazing because these two things, which is basically, you can see in the photo here, they've lasted since the 18th century. And we're lucky that distillery, we still have the original distillery. And if you visit Dublin, you can still see the tower, you can still see the pear tree, a lot of history behind Rowan Co. So this is the old kind of distillery, this is the old storehouse, so this is Guinness. We bought back the distillery in 2017, and this is who we are today. So yeah, we basically taken the old storehouse and turned it into this amazing distillery where you can come for drinks, you can see the stills. It's a fantastic place. You can see all the hard work that's been put into bringing the spirit back, which is really fantastic. So what's really unique about our Irish whiskey, I'm not sure how to get rid of this. What's really unique about Irish whiskey is it's very similar to bourbon. So a lot of people will say that they don't like whiskey until they try Rowan Co. It's really unique because we age all our Irish whiskey in ex-bourbon barrels, so that gives it a little bit more of a sweeter flavor. And Irish whiskey is 45% ABV, so slightly higher in ABV. The reason being is because we want it to taste amazing neat, and we want it to taste amazing in cocktails. And what you'll get in our Rowan Co is really kind of creamy pear, biscuity, almost chocolatey, hazelnut kind of flavors. And people love this. They absolutely love it because they say it's so approachable, and it's got an amazing story behind it. It was basically made in collaboration with 5 Dublin bartenders. So this whiskey is not only the brainchild of our master blender Caroline Martin, it's a collaboration. A lot of hard work to get to this final liquid. Tried 106 recipes before we got to the final Rowan Co recipe. So we affectionately call this blend 106 because 106 recipes later, we managed to get to Rowan Co, which is fascinating. So if you ever get a chance to try Rowan Co, please do. You'll see how different it is. It's the pear comes through, the biscuity aromas come through. It's delicious and a very, very approachable whiskey. And it's a very good whiskey to start on if you don't like Scotch, if you don't like American whiskey, you find those too kind of peaty or too kind of smoky. Irish whiskey is a really good starting point for whiskey because it's a lot more approachable and a lot more smooth. So that's Rowan Co. So the key serves here with Rowan Co, always a pint of Guinness, Rowan Co and a dram of Guinness, Rowan Co dram and a pint of Guinness. It's one of the best combinations, really. And a lot of places you'll see Guinness, they'll be pouring Rowan Co. So that's one of our favorite serves. A serve that I created, which was really simple because Rowan Co, we're all about, again, simple drinks. We don't want to make exclusive. We don't want to have all these fancy cocktails that you can't make at home. So we're all about exclusivity. So this cocktail is really simple. All you need is Bulleit, that says Bulleit. It's meant to say Rowan Co. Rowan Co, Balthazar Rosé, which is the vermouth that we have, and topped with tonic. This is perfect on a really hot day. It's very delicious, and build that in a highball. So yeah, that's all the whiskey bits. If you need me, this is my Instagram and my email. But I'm going to show you guys a really fun cocktail.
Great.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about the Rowan Co. bottle?
Yeah.
You know the punt in the base of the bottle, is that shaped like a pear on purpose?
Yeah, I'm just going to stop sharing the screen. It is. It basically, you can see it. I'm not sure if you can see it very well.
Ooh, if you pull back a little bit. There it is. We can sort of see the shape there.
Yeah, it's meant to be a pear. So
Cool.
when you pour it out, it's meant to, it's just an homage to that pear tree that's basically lasted since the 18th century. I remember when I went to the distillery and they're like, "Don't eat the pears," and because I'm a child, I was like, "I'm going to eat it anyways." But they were very old pears. There's a reason they say don't do things. I was like, I do it anyways.
like
and what's just yeah, I did, which I regretted because I couldn't get the taste out afterwards. It was just an old pear. What's really interesting as well about Rowan Co. is we are actually a predominantly female team. So it wasn't an intention of anyone. We just got the master blender, who's Caroline Martin. You've got the main blender and her assistant are also female, so Laura Hemi and Fiona. And then we have Haley, who leads all of Rowan Co. And then you have me that does GB. And then we have Alan. He's always outnumbered by us. But yeah, it's trying to bring whiskey into the modern era and to show people that you can have fun with whiskey. Even with Bulleit as well, that's the whole message: is have fun with whiskey, have a play. There are no rules. There are no specific ways to drink your whiskey. As long as you like the flavors in those cocktails, then that's the most important thing.
Great.
So we're going to grab the ingredients, which are here. Passion fruit. So we're going to make a tropical drink. This is one of my favorite drinks to have because it's tropical, it's fun, and it's using Rowan Co. And all you're going to really need is passion fruit and the juice of 1 lime or half a lime. And then you're going to need lots of ice to shake with and serve with. And you're also going to need your vessel, which is here, which is a highball, and something to measure with. So I have a jigger here. If you don't have a jigger, you can use measuring spoons. And if you don't have a shaker, you can also use things like a takeaway coffee cup. You can use a jar. Great thing about a jar is that you can just serve it, put some ice in, and that's your vessel as well. So you don't need fancy equipment to make cocktails at home. Just kind of use what you have. Let's see if we can focus on this. So we're going to take 50 milliliters of whiskey. Put that in there. And then we're going to take half a passion fruit and we're just going to scrape all of that into the shaker. So it's almost like a tropical whiskey cocktail. I'm just going to scrape all of that in there. And then you're going to take the juice of half a lime. And then you're going to want to take 20 mils of your sweetener. So what I've made is honey. I tend to make honey syrup. So it's a cup of honey to 1 cup of water. The reason I do that is because it just makes the honey more easier to work with. And I add 20 mils of that. So you can add 20 mils of any sweetener that you prefer. You can also use agave. You can also use sugar syrup, whatever you have to hand. And then we're going to fill this up with ice. And we're going to give this a nice shake. So when you shake your cocktail, obviously, you want to make sure when you shake it, it's nice and frosty on the outside, as you can see. And then you'll have a little lip here. And that's where you're going to bang it to get all the lovely juices out. Usually I would use a fine strainer for this, but I can't find my strainer at the moment. And I love playing with mixers. So a lot of people, they stick with tonic. I like to experiment. Sometimes I use coconut water. Sometimes I like to reach for things like sparkling mango juice because it's delicious with whiskey. I'm going to add some ice in there. You want to get as much ice in the glass as physically possible. And then you just want to top up with your mixer. This also works really well with coconut water if you don't have sparkling mango. But it's really refreshing.
Wow, that looks good.
There you go. It's fantastic. A tropical take. As you can see, it just looks refreshing and delightful.
Gosh, I'm so jealous.
That is tasty.
That looks like the sort of cocktail you could almost put an umbrella on that.
Yeah, we what we like to do with whiskey, especially with my team, we like to make it fun. There are a lot of amazing drinks out there, but for us, whiskey is having fun. Have a play with the flavors you like. Some people will tell you why are you putting sparkling mango in your whiskey. You know what? It's about fun. And if it tastes good, it tastes good. And I like this drink a lot with coconut water. I have a lot of whiskey cocktails. So if anyone wants to know some recipes, I'm more than happy to ping them over.
Great, fantastic. Well, we let you enjoy that drink. In the meantime, let's open it up to the chat here, guys. What kind of questions have you got for Kirsten here? This is the opportunity for you to ask her anything about any of the products really that she presented about. Anything about maybe Irish whiskey towards against bourbon. Maybe what's the difference between Scotch, Irish whiskey, and all that kind of stuff. Feel free to put anything in the chat. Ted, anything coming through yet?
Not just yet, boss, but whilst people are typing, as you have probably guessed, I've maybe got some questions.
Yep, half an hour later.
So you've got a sort of combined background from beer and both whiskey.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things is also a Boilermaker. I won't mention the brands that I like because I don't think they align, but yeah, I quite like Absinthe and a particular beer. Have you ever experimented with different cocktails that include both whiskey and beer at the same time? And if so, do you have any off the top of your head that you could reel off for us? Because I love a whiskey beer mix up.
I like a michelada. So it's basically lager with a spice mix. And if you feel like adding you can add a bit of whiskey in there as well. Loads of beer cocktails. I've done a whiskey sour once, just your regular whiskey sour, and then I made a beer foam. So I took the blueberry sour beer that we had from Guinness and I turned it into a foam, and then I just topped the whiskey sour with that.
Oh yeah.
Which was delicious. But Boilermakers is something that we really champion. So here at Bulleit, we love Boilermakers. We love our favorite Boilermaker. The whole Bulleit team is the Pickleback.
Yeah, Jameson's, yeah.
Pickleback whiskey and a beer, that's the best combination. And they're like, why do you guys love Pickleback so much? Boilermakers, it's just because whiskey, when you have it with a really nice beer, it opens up different flavors. So for example, bourbon, a lot of people would tell you lagers and pales. For me, bourbon with a really nice crisp saison, it's fantastic. With a wheat beer, rye, a wheat beer is an amazing combination. Even with stouts, rye is a fantastic pairing. Whiskey and beer, because they are so similar in what they are, they really complement each other. And the flavors that you get when you take a sip of beer, that you take a sip of whiskey, it's two different things. You keep getting different flavors, and that's why Boilermakers are fantastic. And yeah, Boilermakers are something we love here at Bulleit.
So Boilermakers, I don't know if everyone on the call knows what a Boilermaker is. What's a classic Boilermaker? Just a shot of whiskey and a beer of any description.
Yeah, so we tend to stay away from the word shot.
Sorry, yes, a nipple.
Responsible. It's more of like a side of whiskey and a beer, and basically a Boilermaker. It's a celebration, so it's something that comes from the 18th century as well. Because back in the day, people used to drink a lot. And these guys, they would come off the trains, they'd be working on the locomotive trains all day long, filling up the boilers with coal, and they would walk into pubs and they would ask for a pint of beer, and a dram of whiskey. Sometimes they would say 2 fingers or 3 fingers. If they were feeling really merry, they would say 4 fingers of whiskey. And it became a tradition for people, once they finish work, to celebrate with a whiskey and beer. And it's very common for you just to get now together, toast at the end of the day. It's been a long day. It's been a Friday. Let's just get some beers. Let's get some whiskey and just try different flavorings. And that's kind of where the Boilermaker came from. It's because these workers, these blue-collared workers, it was a celebration for them once they finished work, just to have that cold beer and some whiskey.
Helped to ease the back pain from many hours of shoveling coal, yeah. And pickleback, is it just straight pickle juice that you drink, or is it?
It's tastier than it sounds. It's basically
straight
pickle juice and whiskey and pickle juice, but never go out with the Bulleit lot, because we drink those all night. And some people that we don't know how do you do it, and it's terrible. We can go through bottles of pickle juice. We have a company that we work with, the Pickle House, and they were like, we don't know how you guys drink so much pickle juice. It's disgusting. I'm like, it's not. It's great. It's a great pairing with whiskey.
Boss, I've got to check. Did you say whiskey then pickle juice?
Yeah, whiskey and pickle juice.
Oh, whoa. Pickle juice then whiskey.
Pardon?
Pickle juice then whiskey. It's the secret to making the pickleback easier to handle. I know it's supposed to be pickle juice second, the pickle on the back, but yeah, I have to admit I drink them the wrong way around so that I can handle it. But black pepper in your pickle juice, that helps it go down smooth.
Yeah, but picklebacks, they're a firm favourite in our team. I think Daniel's asked a question.
I can see it. Yeah, he'd love some recipes to come through if possible. He says he's very keen to go into the pub industry and wants to end up with his own pub. If he does get his own pub, would you be willing to come and visit and do your brand stuff?
Definitely. If you were to open your pub, as long as you have picklebacks, then we're good.
Fair enough.
But definitely, I mean, the best thing to do is, like I said, I'm very active on Instagram. And lots of bartenders actually reach out to me on Instagram, have lots of chats with people. And yeah, I'm really open to chatting. I like to keep the conversation open. And if you feel like, chatting to me after this on Instagram, I'm more than happy to answer any questions, have a chat. And yeah, always open to chats.
Great.
Is that an underscore? Underscore J, got it. Sorry, I think I follow the rest of the team, Ali and Andy and Jack. I've just added you. Followers have gone up by 1. Now, oh, sorry, I've got another slightly more technical question, perhaps. Sorry, I always do. I will keep an eye out for more questions in the chat. When it comes to the different whiskies between Scotland and Ireland and bourbon, I always find that they interact with the different cocktails that we make in strange ways. For instance, when I make an old fashioned, if I'm using bourbon, I tend to cut down the amount of sugar gone that I would put in, or less sugar cube if I'm using cube sugar. Yeah. Are there any sort of top tips you've got as a rule of thumb for changing the levels of sweetness that you add to them based on whether it's Scottish, Irish, or bourbon whiskies?
Yeah. So with bourbon, if it's a sweeter bourbon, you wouldn't have to add as much sugar. With our bourbon, because we do use a heavy portion of rye, people do like to add probably 5 mils extra bar spoon of sugar into an old fashioned, depending on the customer, because lots of consumers, they do prefer sweet. With our rye, if you are using it in Manhattan, definitely taste it and ensure there's a balance of sugar in there. Because like I said, the rye is quite spicy. It's more savory, and some people might not like that pepperiness. Main thing is, if someone hasn't tried it before, if you can, within your limits in your bar, just let people try, so they can enjoy the drink the best themselves. With Scotch, obviously it depends whether it's a peaty Scotch. It depends if it's more of a smoky Scotch. It really depends. So you can just taste and adjust. Scotch, definitely. I know a lot of people, they try to add a little bit more sugar, or they add different kind of sweeteners to make it a little bit more approachable. Irish is very mellow, and Irish, especially with Roe & Co, it will carry flavors quite well. So Roe & Co is a very adaptable whiskey. Irish whiskey in general, and for me, like I say with other brands, I don't think there's any competition. I get on with everyone in this industry. So for us, it's more about the category growth. So yeah, with Irish whiskey, very more approachable, a little bit more mellow, more kind of bourbon in flavour. So Irish definitely can do lots of interesting things.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was comprehensive. Sorry, I was taking notes. Wolfgang, anything from you, boss?
No, I think I don't think I can go into as much detail as you always with your questioning there. I'm just looking forward to trying a Bulleit next time, and I'm definitely going to use some of these recipes. They sound intriguing. That's for sure. So yeah, let's say last minute question or last minute opportunity for a question for you guys. Friday afternoon, I know it is. Everybody looking forward to the weekend. So this is the last chance for you to ask Kirsten any question about what we've talked about today. And if not, I would say then we just all wish you a really, really nice weekend.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I think Daniel said he wants to, but yeah, Daniel, get in touch. Drop me a message on Instagram. We can chat. Anyone, again, feel free to, always open to questions. But thank you very much for having me.
Great, thank you, Kirsten.
And like I said, anyone wants to ever chat about getting into work, or if you need some help with it, again, reach out. More than happy to answer, to help in any way I can.
Brilliant, fantastic.
Gang, thanks.
Thank you so much for your time.
Wolfgang? Sorry, I
just want to say thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And yes, we're really jealous of the drink that you have in front of you there. So we'll let you enjoy that now and have a great weekend. And yes, if ever you want to listen to the session again, just let us know and we'll give you access to this recorded session anytime. Okay?
Thank you very much. You have a good weekend.
Thank you, boss. I'm going to end the recording just there, gang.
Okay.